It's Friday, wrestling fans, you know what that means. November 25, 1991 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. A look at the debut of the WWE'S first steroid policy. By Observer staff. Tests, lies and videotape. It's easier to fool the people with a big lie than it is a small one. Joseph Goebbels, Adolf Hitler's propagandist. In a week where most of the major wrestling news came from the dressing room in New Haven, a court in Charlotte, and on television programs Entertainment Tonight and Inside Edition, the World Wrestling Federation became the first promotion to test its wrestlers for anabolic steroids. The much-ballyhooed first test took place this past Wednesday, prior to the television tapings in New Haven. The test also took place one day prior to a scheduled piece involving alleged, and not so alleged, use of anabolic steroids by WWF wrestlers and the announcement of steroid testing by the company in July, without any testing having yet taken place, on Entertainment Tonight, and a similar piece scheduled for the following day by Inside Edition. The WWF claims the timing of the first test as being just one day before they were going to be blasted on national television for announcing testing and not testing, was simply coincidental. Even though that sentence will be met with skepticism by a large percentage reading it, it may actually be true. It was obvious from seeing the physiques of certain wrestlers in the past few days and also confirmed by one source, that at least some wrestlers had advanced warning of the first test and had gotten off steroids, even though there will be no penalties involved if any wrestlers failed Wednesday's test. While the date of the Entertainment Tonight piece wasn't well known within the industry until 4 days before airtime, the Inside Edition air date was known weeks in advance. In addition, the November 5 meeting of the Florida legislature in which state-mandated anabolic steroid testing was discussed, also could have forced the WWF's hand, although that certainly would also be denied by the WWF. But more important than the possible whys and timing coincidences of the first test, and more important than the ET story, the reaction to the ET story, the Inside Edition story and the ET follow-up story on Monday is just what is the WWF steroid program all about. We've actually been only able to ascertain a few details of the program, since the policy is being kept confidential. But we've been flooded with questions, and have had many questions ourselves.
Q. Is the testing real? A. As far as a legitimate group of specialists in the procedure and a legitimate laboratory collecting urine specimens, analyzing them for steroid content and coming up with legitimate results, almost certainly.
All results will be kept confidential, with the only people knowing the results being the doctors who had the program and Vince McMahon.
Q. What are the penalties associated with steroid use?
A. There will be no penalties for failing Wednesday's test. This is only fair to the wrestlers because some popular injectable steroids can be picked up in the test from several months back, even possibly before the WWF's first announcement. It would be unfair, and probably subject to legal action, if they suspended wrestlers for taking steroids before the WWF had officially established a steroid policy. Steroid levels in those who originally tested positive need to consistently drop in future testing, and all new positive test results will bring upon a 6-week suspension without pay for a first-time offender. A second offense will bring an additional 6-week suspension and mandatory drug rehabilitation. A third offense will result in termination.
Q. How accurate are the tests?
A. There is no such thing as an unbeatable steroid test. According to Dr. Anthony F. Daly Jr., who oversees the program for the WWF, it is basically impossible to come up with a false positive result. In other words, if the test comes back showing steroid use, it is inconceivable that it is a mistake. However, those well-schooled in the technology of the testing procedure can test negative even though they are using steroids or other similar performance-enhancing drugs.
Q. What about growth hormones?
A. There are no tests that can detect use of drugs like human growth hormone, HGH. HGH is considered the ultimate drug in some bodybuilding circles, even though there are steroid experts who believe the drug is overrated in its benefits to muscularity. It is also extremely expensive and somewhat difficult to obtain. Because of the expense, it is believed only the most hardcore of the druggies in wrestling have had experience with it. STH, or primate hormones, as described by Mary Lou Gantner as drugs her son Ed and other wrestlers were using in her testimony in Florida, are also undetectable in steroid tests. Q. Are there other steroid-like drugs that either aren't being tested for or are undetectable? A. Clenbuterol, which is believed to be the new favorite muscular growth drug of certain WCW wrestlers, could be used and one would still pass the WWF steroid test. Daly said he's not sure clenbuterol even works as anything more than a placebo, although later Daly theorized clenbuterol delivers an initial spark in their lifting, but it doesn't last very long. From what I've been told, nobody in WCW is actually sure if the effects are more than placebo effects either, but that many wrestlers will try anything touted heavily enough as a muscular growth enhancer. Daly did say there was a study in England with human beings that showed enhanced muscular growth attributable to clenbuterol, but that it was the only study of its kind with those results. A study done on laboratory animals with clenbuterol also showed over a 12-week period a 13% increase in muscle mass and 20% decrease in body fat content.
Q. What about injecting straight testosterone, since the body manufactures it naturally and it can't be tested for as a foreign substance?
Straight testosterone or esters of testosterone, which is associated with stronger side effects than other steroids, will be tested on a ratio basis with a p-androsterone. A 6:1 or greater testosterone versus a p-androsterone ratio will be considered a positive, which is the same ratio used by the NFL. The 6:1 figure is arbitrary. It is this ratio that is considered, aside from the growth hormones, to be the biggest hole in the NFL test. A normal human being has a 1:1 testosterone versus a p-androsterone ratio. In tests on thousands of athletes who had never used steroids, not once has a ratio greater than 2:1 been found naturally. Steroid expert Dr. James Wright tested dozens of athletes who he injected with 300 mg weekly of straight testosterone. None showed greater than a 4.2:1 ratio, or in other words, wouldn't even come close to a positive test in either the WWF or NFL drug test. Straight testosterone, unlike growth hormone, is very cheap, as an athlete can get 6 standard size injections for $30, according to an article called Money for Muscle in Pro Football Weekly. Those with an even better knowledge of ratios can inject a p-androsterone as well, which would allow an even greater amount of testosterone to be injected and still pass the test, although to pull this off takes extreme sophistication.
Q. What masking agents are being tested for?
That's confidential. The NFL tests for at least 20 different masking agents. Apparently there is an agent called Defend that masks steroid content in urine that either the NFL doesn't have on its list of banned substances or is not yet traceable in tests. Some NFL players are allegedly using it this season to beat the random tests. A drug called carinamide, which was a favorite among athletes in the 1988 Olympic Games because it wasn't on the IOC's list of banned substances, is also not on the NFL's list of banned substances, although the NFL policy does have a program in reference to diuretics and masking agents banning all related substances. Carinamide is used to block the urinary excretion of steroid metabolites.
Q. How long do the steroids stay in your system that do show up in the test?
That depends on many factors: the quantity of use, your own body type, and most importantly, what kind of steroid is being used. The most popular injectable, decadurabolin and Winstrol V, according to Daly, can stay in one system as long as 4 months. Most oral steroids have a shorter time clearing one system, but it is generally recommended that taking oral steroids such as Anavar, Anadrol 50 or Dianabol tablets, that one should stop 14 to 21 days before testing, which is generally the length of time used by competition bodybuilders when they were being tested. With testing being unannounced, trying to plan timing with these drugs alone is clearly putting one at a tremendous risk of getting caught. Ironically, the injectable drugs are less toxic to one's kidneys and liver than the oral drugs. But the oral drugs will show up in a test for a far shorter period of time. Because of this, some pro-steroid sources in the track world have argued that the real-world results of testing in the sports world has only made athletes switch to the more dangerous oral drugs because they can be used closer to the testing date for announced tests, and then have them switch to the undetectable growth hormones, which may be the most dangerous of them all, up until test time. I'm not sure if that argument can be made for unannounced testing in real-world application resulting in making athletes switch to more dangerous drugs, except for those with access to the growth hormones. Steroids such as DHT derivatives, Firazabolin and Pasomax, both banned by the NFL, can be cleared from one system in 3 days. Those can be used by NFL players at certain times during the week, since testing is always on Sunday, and one could state with almost certainty WWF won't test wrestlers less than 4 days apart, so they could potentially be used. Getting them is another story. Q. Does this test have anything more than public relations value?
A. The jury is out.
This test will not totally eliminate steroid use among WWF wrestlers, but it will probably be enough to satisfy the mainstream media, which for the most part would never investigate this story past the superficial level, and sponsors who may have had a problem because of the bad press associated with the subject. Almost all sources believe use in the NFL, with similar testing, has dropped considerably, but that there are still players beating the tests. In real-world application, this will probably be the result of the WWF's testing as well. If it is, then it is a step forward, but not an answer to the problem. The answer is the far more difficult task of re-educating the audience away from unnatural physiques. However, anabolic steroids are both more prevalent, and more important to wrestlers as compared with football players because the emphasis is on the physique rather than ability. So they may be more concerned than football players with finding ways to beat the test. Right now, use appears to be down among WWF wrestlers just in the past few weeks, probably due to the word about testing being leaked out. At the WWF show 3 weeks ago in Oakland, I'd estimate 69 to 75% of the wrestlers on that show were on steroids. At this past Friday night's card, I'd estimate that dropping to 28 to 33%, which is a very significant drop in a short period of time. But use clearly hadn't been eliminated. There were significant physical differences in wrestlers who had appeared here on both tours. Almost surely use will continue to decrease over the short haul because the vast majority of wrestlers, if they believe the tests and punishments are real and those I have spoken with believe they are, will probably go clean at least until they're confident understanding what the system is. At that point, at least a few will probably attempt to find ways to beat it and maybe some of them will get caught along with way. The funny thing is, use is also down in WCW, perhaps because of the legal troubles it can cause as is better known in the WCW locker room, and also because it seems that WCW wrestlers are having a harder time finding sources. The black market supply has been cut down, doctors are a lot less likely to supply the drugs for obvious legal reasons, and a growing amount of black market steroids are fakes. In addition, all but the top rung of wrestlers don't earn enough money to justify the expense of buying growth hormones. Realistically, eliminating steroids from the WWF, or any other organization, completely is not going to happen, even though we can count on Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan claiming it. But McMahon should be held to realistic standards, even if some public claims of the WWF as drug-free sports entertainment are as unattainable as attempts to have a drug-free society are. If the competitive advantages one gains from using steroids are eliminated, combined with this testing program, we can say the WWF has done all it can to eradicate the problem as much as is possible. The best we can hope for is to get it under control. This test can, if accompanied by education of the audience away from physique being used as the major criterion for a push, be a significant step forward, but that is certainly a big if.
Q. Who was tested in New Haven and who will be tested?
A. All wrestlers and managers under contract to the WWF. Jobbers, or extras as they are called by the WWF, have to sign a piece of paper stating they haven't used illegal drugs, and steroids are an illegal drug. But since they aren't under contract, they won't be tested.
Q. How did the wrestlers react to the tests? A. The more experienced wrestlers, who realized the media pressure Hulk Hogan and the WWF were under, accepted it without any complaints, realizing it had to be done.
Some wrestlers welcomed it, believing, if strictly enforced it'll level the playing field so to speak and increase the opportunities for those with genuine ability and desire above the steroid freaks. The vast majority didn't complain, at least aloud, on Wednesday. Only a few wrestlers were openly very upset about it on Wednesday. Both McMahon and Daly said that every contract wrestler was tested. Daly even said that nobody complained, and he himself may very likely not have seen anyone complain, although it was confirmed that a few did, some loudly. 2 sources have said there was one exception who didn't take the test, but both separate sources had the same name, a wrestler known for being among the most vocal about being against testing from the beginning.
Q. Do the WWF wrestlers believe the tests are real? A. I think so, even though even a suggestion that they are to wrestlers outside the WWF brings a response generally of uproarious laughter. Q. Do you believe if a big name fails a test, that they'll really be suspended? A. We will have a better idea of that in a few months. McMahon came off as deadly serious about the subject in New Haven, and the fact that the physiques of some big names have changed of late makes me think they believe it. There have been a few, actually very few, headliners suspended in the past over cocaine since the program was instituted in 1987. There have certainly been many allegations, unproven but numerous, that not everyone who has failed cocaine tests has been suspended. Q. What about Hulk Hogan? A. I think it's pretty clear he's not taking steroids right now. But if he wasn't failed a test, I think you'd find very few people within the wrestling business who would even entertain the notion for a second he'd be penalized for it, although the WWF would surely dispute that. Q. After all the lies that have been told in the past on this subject, why should we believe the WWF is serious here? A. I have an answer as to why. They have to realize by now that this story won't go away until this story really goes away. After this week, they really are finally aware that really is the case. It's publicity that does nobody any good. Steroid use became a felony in February, which athletes who have taken them for years when they were legal in many cases simply haven't been able to get through their heads.
More important, over the long haul, somebody is going to buy a bad batch of fake steroids from a black market source and have a real bad reaction, or maybe even die. If, after all this rhetoric, something like that happens, there is potential for real serious damage to this business. After saying all this, I'm still personally skeptical. But over the next 2 months it'll be quite obvious one way or another.
Q. Is this a significant step forward?
A. This past week, the WWF brought in Chris Walker and Del Wilkes for tryouts. What they are looking for when they test out, hire and push new wrestlers doesn't appear to have changed, either freakish size or impressive muscularity. John Tenta or a 6'10" Cajun giant have freakish size which has nothing to do with steroids. The impressive muscularity is directly related to it. If that doesn't change, and there is no evidence that it will, this testing is largely for public relations value.
Q. What changes should we expect to see as far as the physiques of wrestlers?
A. That depends on the wrestler. Everybody is obviously born with a genetic predisposition to look a certain way, and that changes as they get older. Some people get great results just looking at barbells. Others have to work their butts off to get even minimal results. In wrestlers who are naturally smaller guys that have an extreme pumped-up look, they should look more normal and decrease in size. One wrestler, a moderate user who is pretty genetically gifted, who got off steroids in August and hasn't gotten back on, has retained a good deal of his muscularity, but has dropped between 25 and 35 pounds. Most of the wrestlers under, say about 30 to 32 years old, will generally lose weight, won't be cut sharply, but will only lose some muscle tone. The older wrestlers may actually shrink less as far as scale weight loss, but lose a lot of muscle tone. Because a man's natural testosterone level drops, it is very difficult to look like a bodybuilder after the age of 35 without outside help.
Q. When, and how often, will future tests occur?
A. All the information released is that the tests will be random and unannounced. No other information regarding frequency and how random is random has not been released, other than those who tested positive on Wednesday will be tested with more frequency than those who tested negative. This explains why the percentage of wrestlers on the juice appears to have significantly dropped leading into the first test. QQ. Will the WWF announce who fails the test?
A. No, but it's hard not to notice when someone is put on suspension. Q. If someone fails a test, but isn't suspended, is there any way to find out? A. No. Q. The WWF claimed that this is the most comprehensive steroid test in sports.
What makes it better than other drug tests? A. Well, Major League Baseball, ice hockey and pro basketball don't test for anabolic steroids. At the same time, there is no evidence those drugs are used by anywhere near the percentage of wrestlers that use these drugs, and certainly not in as heavy dosages. Steroids don't offer anywhere near the competitive advantages in either basketball or baseball that they do in pro wrestling, which still may not excuse those leagues from ignoring that there may be an issue. Different amateur sports have different rules regarding testing, but I'm not sure what makes this program any better than others that do unannounced random testing. Testing in the Olympics in most sports are easy to beat, just as the old NFL tests were. When the athletes know in advance the day of the test, it's relatively easy to clean out their system enough to beat a test. When I asked Vince McMahon what made this test better than the NFL's, he said that unlike the NFL, they would test year-round because they don't have an off-season, ignoring, or not knowing that the NFL policy specifically states players are tested during the off-season, although clearly players do go home and it seems to be harder to actually have them in a place where they can be tested. One legitimate possible advantage is that the WWF only has about 55 wrestlers to test, as compared with 1,400 football players, so it is more economical. Each steroid test costs approximately $170 to test more frequently. When I asked Dr. Daly what made this test better than the NFL's, he said it was because it was random, unannounced testing, unlike the NFL's. That worried me because he's the expert, yet every non-expert following this story knows the NFL has random, unannounced testing, something the head of this program, an expert on the procedures of steroid testing, admitted being unaware of.
Q. What about the World Bodybuilding Federation? A. What about it?
No bodybuilders have been tested to the best of my knowledge, although based on what I've been told, they will be. Titan has made at least 3 public announcements of testing, one of them specifically stating testing would take place before its first contest, 5 months ago, and testing never occurred. One can't help but think that if ET and Inside Edition's pieces were about Lou Ferrigno instead of Hulk Hogan, that things may be different. Q. Was the testing done on Wednesday because the WWF knew about the Inside Edition and Entertainment Tonight pieces that were going to make them look bad? A. Vince McMahon called that suggestion patently absurd and wasn't happy about the insinuation of such by Inside Edition. I do know that at one point they had set a date for the first test for the previous television tapings, which I thought was to get a test in before the November 5th Florida hearings, but it didn't happen, so maybe it's just a coincidence. But if you consider Titan's original announcement and press conference came after scathing media pressure in the New York area after the Zarian trial, and they then claimed the Zarian trial and the resultant publicity had nothing to do with them deciding to test, it does make the timing seem like less of a coincidence.
Q. In a nutshell, what does this all mean? A. The changes really should be evident by Thanksgiving.
At Survivor Series, if we don't see a noticeable change in the wrestlers who were unnaturally muscular beforehand, then we'll know who isn't taking the program seriously. If those individuals are still around by Christmas and are just as muscular, we know this program means very little. But we'll all know the answers very shortly. So now it's on to this week's soap opera, of how the videotape turns. Both Entertainment Tonight and Inside Edition had planned stories on the subject of the WWF and anabolic steroids. The Inside Edition air date was originally scheduled for a few weeks ago, but moved to a Friday night during sweeps month for ratings purposes. Entertainment Tonight had been planning a story on the subject for some time, and scheduled it for Thursday, mainly to scoop Inside Edition. The irony of all this is that what opened up what had been a dormant story in the mainstream media was nothing having to do with breaking news on the story, but simply it was rating sweeps and it involved Hulk Hogan. Both pieces were no doubt already completed as of Wednesday night, when Steve Planamenta of the WWF called both shows to tell them about the testing in New Haven. Inside Edition apparently cared little, didn't change its story, and just ended with its host making an apparent snide remark concerning the timing coincidence of the piece and the first test. Entertainment Tonight changed the entire story, rushed to get new comments from Bruno Sammartino. They had originally done an interview months back with Sammartino that was scheduled for this piece, but they felt the story had changed, and Alex Merves, who told them his comments in the interview just conducted wouldn't have to be changed because testing had taken place. They also tried to interview Billy Graham, who would have been the focal point of the piece most likely since his story is the most interesting, but for legal reasons, Graham's attorneys advised him strongly against talking. Graham's name is significant, because it was his participation in either of the two stories that had officials the most worried. Entertainment Tonight then went to New Haven. They weren't allowed access to any big-name wrestlers. From here, the story gets fragmented. I'm not sure if the WWF actually provided them with two jobbers, Ryan Donahue and Dale Dusty Wolf, or if they just managed to corral them themselves. Donahue said the steroid testing is fine with us. It's fine with everyone in that locker room. Of course, Donahue himself wasn't tested, and to say it's fine with everyone clearly wasn't the case, just as statements by Dr. Daly that nobody complained wasn't the case, and I'm not quite sure about McMahon's statement that everyone took the test because of two reports that came this way that one major star didn't. Wolf then said he wasn't tested, but as far as he knew, there were some tests given. Here's where the dispute and the problem comes in. According to the WWF, they specifically told Entertainment Tonight that the jobbers, or extras, weren't going to be tested. If that's the case, then by airing Wolf's comments immediately after saying the WWF claimed every wrestler had been tested, it would appear to a television viewer to conclusively show the WWF as liars. While they have been in some circumstances, in this specific case that was clearly misleading the audience. However, if ET wasn't clearly told by the WWF that every wrestler only meant every wrestler under contract and didn't include the extras, then while the result of the audience getting the wrong impression is the same, one can't blame ET. The piece aired Thursday night. They mentioned Zarian's testimony that Hogan had a serious steroid abuse program. The narrator John Tesh said Hogan admitted to having used legal steroids but not illegal steroids, which was poorly written, because if Hogan used anabolic steroids between 1984 and 1989 and really hasn't since, then he never used illegal steroids to begin with, but clearly that's not what Hogan was admitting to. A clip of a September interview with Hogan where he denied anabolic steroid use was then shown. Then came the clip of Donahue of the statement about everyone being tested by the WWF. The apparent contradiction with the Wolf clip, a clip of Bruno Sammartino claiming that the tests would be a sham, and a clip of Alex Merves saying the problem would continue as long as there was an emphasis on physiques, and pointed out how Titan Sports lied 3 times about steroid testing as it related to the WBF, and asked, why should we believe them now? On Friday, Vince McMahon called Entertainment Tonight, furious about the piece. His main complaint was that the Wolf clip misled the viewing audience, which was a valid complaint. He also questioned the credibility of Sammartino and Merves. Granted, it is hardly a secret about the bitterness that exists between Sammartino and McMahon, but one has to look at Sammartino's statement. Was it unfair? The popular belief throughout the wrestling industry, which doesn't mean it is correct, would be the same as Sammartino's. It is a point that could fairly be brought up, and given the overall credibility of the WWF, probably should have been brought up. Certainly it's something we've discussed here, but it's also not something we would be fair in stating as fact, at least at the present time. As for Merves, he tried to dismiss him as a gossip columnist, but the point Merves made just points out the credibility problem of the WWF. When the boy cried wolf, or in this case, cried steroid testing for about the 5th time, what happened in the fable? If I recall the fable, the last time there really was a wolf, and this time there may really be steroid testing, but how, after all this, can anyone expect someone following this story closely to accept this without skepticism? The end result of all this was that E.T. agreed to give McMahon time on Monday to talk about the subject. The result was a segment, with Hulk this time claiming to have been the first one to take the test and how he wants the results of his test made public to clear his name and make everyone realize he represents physical fitness. Jim Duggan then claimed he had worked hard for his body and resented any insinuations he took shortcuts to get it, which was more unintentionally hilarious than anything. Ric Flair said he was the cleanest thing going today. As I listened to the piece for a second time with a former WWF wrestler on the Eastern Time Zone, he started laughing as an apparently sincere Vince McMahon said whatever he said. He looked right at the camera and didn't even flinch, said the wrestler, both astounded by McMahon's gall and at the same time impressed by his working ability. A WWF spokesman, I believe Steve Planamenta, called Inside Edition also on Friday to relate to them what happened with E.T. Inside Edition folks believed it amounted to a last-ditch pressure tactic to get them to drop or change the story. It didn't work. Inside Edition is clearly one of the sleaze journalistic type shows, euphemistically called tabloid TV, similar to A Current Affair, that have gained popularity in recent years. Inside Edition hardly did the background research that E.T. did, but armed with more airtime, came up with a more powerful story. The story talked about the positives, muscle growth, and negatives, health problems, associated with steroids. They had an unidentified former pro wrestler explain that the larger and more muscular one's appearance, the better off one will be in wrestling, and that all the pro wrestlers he associated with had used steroids. He identified Dr. George Zahorian as his source. Zahorian was then shown saying that no medical literature has established steroids as a link to the various health problems. Bruno Sammartino was shown saying he remembered the line that formed of WWF wrestlers at the television tapings to get the goodies from Zahorian. U.S. Attorney James West described Zahorian as a doctor who had gone bad, and compared him with a cocaine or heroin pusher. They showed the trial testimony where Zahorian called Hogan a serious steroid abuser, had a clip of Billy Graham talking about his health problems, sterility and bone degeneration, attributed to steroids, and that he planned to sue the WWF. The other major story of the week involves the NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt and the facsimile of such that has just been introduced by the WWF. An article by Joseph Men appeared on page 1 of the Charlotte Observer this past Friday stating, the NWA bestowed the belt on famed Matthews wrestler Ric Flair. The Platinum Blonde walked out, taking his belt, hose and grins to the rival WWF. The NWA sued the WWF Wednesday because it had been televising Flair wearing its belt, saying statements like, "This is the belt worn by the real world champion." The NWA argued its symbol is being used to benefit the competition. 6 more hours with Flair wearing the NWA belt have been shot to promote an upcoming pay-per-view show. Your Honor, we're going to receive a body blow if these tapes of Flair wearing the NWA belt are shown, charged NWA attorney Fyson Hicks. Will be the laughing stock of the industry. WWF attorney Theodore Dinsmore countered by saying, a lot of wrestlers in this country get gone around with big, flashy gold belts. A belt's a belt. U.S. District Judge Graham Mullen postponed the match with a temporary compromise. The WWF agreed to tell its 300 affiliate stations to cut the belt out of this weekend's television shows. The battle resumes on Thursday. What happened this past Thursday was after viewing 2 hours of testimony and videotapes of Ric Flair, Mullen was about to grant the NWA's request for a temporary restraining order banning the WWF from televising Flair with the NWA belt, which he gave back last week. Apparently at some point there was a claim made by Jim Barnett of World Championship Wrestling that the company had already paid Flair for the belt, but they came up with no proof of payment. The NWA agreed to not press for the restraining order when the WWF agreed to voluntarily edit the belt out of all telecasts this weekend. Or so the NWA thought. The WWF felt it agreed to make its best possible effort to get its affiliates to edit out the belt over this best weekend. The WWF's best efforts must not have been very effective, since the belt appeared in virtually every market in the country. The NWA apparently would have been felt satisfied if the belt was edited out, either by digitizing or putting a black spot over it or by replacing the segments with Ric Flair wearing the belt, An angle on the funeral parlor involving Undertaker and Flair attacking Hogan, a Survivor Series interview, and in some market a house show promo interview for an upcoming card, in all of the top 30 markets, and wouldn't have cared about the smaller markets. As it turned out, to the best of our knowledge, the belt wasn't edited out in any of the top 30 markets, although it was digitized on Primetime Wrestling. Off on a tangent department, the new Primetime format is getting rave reviews from everyone. Monday night. The NWA is also requesting that the WWF not use the NWA belt or a reasonable facsimile on its television shows. The new belt that Flair is carrying around can easily construed as a reasonable facsimile, and while there is no way of knowing how a judge who knows nothing about wrestling will rule on this subject, if he believes the reasonable facsimile argument, the new belt would more likely than not fall into that category. Actually, this entire story is somewhat ridiculous because whatever damage was done to WCW has already been done, and retrieving the belt, or forcing Flair to wear a belt that looks different, doesn't accomplish a thing. Another sad note to report this week: the death of former pro wrestler Roy "Ripper" Collins. We don't have much in the way of details on this, other than the death was reported Sunday on John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight radio show. Collins, who would be 57 according to our records, was said to have died from cancer. Collins wrestled throughout the Southeast during the 1960s. During the early 1970s he gained some fame working for the old Los Angeles promotion as King Ripper Collins, the master of the Opa Drop, which was nothing more than a knee to the groin. He was a top-notch heel color commentator on the wrestling show on KCOP TV with Dick Lane nearly a decade before Roddy Piper reached national prominence doing that role on WTBS. He was also a headliner in the Pacific Northwest during the 1970s. The Ripper resided in Honolulu and billed himself as the King of Hawaii, and was a top heel for Ed Francis' old Honolulu promotion, frequently holding the Old Ring magazine gold belt, symbolic of the Hawaiian Islands heavyweight champion. We've got a nearly completed lineup for the combination SWS/WWF/PWF/EMLL show on December 12th at the Tokyo Egg Dome. The 11-match show will consist of Hulk Hogan vs. Genichiro Tenryu, Legion of Doom vs. Natural Disasters for the WWF Tag Team Championship, British Bulldog and Ashura Hara vs. Yoshiaki Yatsu and Haku, Naoki Sano vs. Rick Martel to determine the first WWF Junior Heavyweight Champion, Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs. Ishinriki, Kerry Von Erich and Samson Fuyuki vs. Ted DiBiase and Great Kabuki Yoshihiro Asai vs. an opponent to be announced, The Rockers vs. George Takano and Masao Orihara, Masakatsu Funaki vs. Minoru Suzuki, plus a tag team match, and an 8-man tag team match involving Japanese wrestlers. There is probably more speculation regarding the December 3rd WWF pay-per-view show from San Antonio than almost anything else right now. No matter what has been announced, and the main event that is being announced is Hulk Hogan vs. Ric Flair, don't take anything as official in regards to the lineup until it is announced at the Survivor Series. There will be a major angle at the show to determine the main event, which will most likely be either Hogan vs. Flair or Hogan vs. Undertaker. One thing that has been speculated on that can pretty much be denied is that there will be a Shawn Michaels vs. Marty Jannetty match on that show, because I don't think the breakup will be occurring that soon. They also have already announced one undercard match for the Royal Rumble on January 19th in Albany, New York, which will be Bushwhackers with Jameson as their manager against Beverly Brothers. The WWF returned to the Cow Palace in San Francisco on Friday, November 15th. It was the first market in which Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan were to have a second meeting. The crowd dropped from 14,900 3 weeks ago in Oakland to a paltry 5,000, one of the 2 or 3 smallest crowds Hogan has ever drawn in the Bay Area with the WWF, partially because this was an experimental show with almost no comp tickets given out, and no money spent on advertising. It had become pretty obvious, using this market as a test, that the interest in Hogan-Flair just wasn't there after the initial meeting, although 3 weeks is too fast to bring the match back. My own belief is that the minute Flair become part of the mix, instead of being an outsider's, he was in trouble, as all he then was is just another cartoon character who happens to be able to work better than the rest of them, and more name value than most of them, but that's it. Maybe he'll get over as a hot member of the mix with upcoming TV angles, but the drawing power he had as the outsider coming in to challenge the WWF's big stars is just about history already, because he was rushed into being part of the mix way too fast. 1. El Matador Tito Santana pinned Colonel Mustafa in about 10 minutes with a sunset flip. We arrived late, but I was told this was a -1-star match. From what I saw, that sounded about right. 2. Chris Walker pinned Kato. Paul Diamond bulked up to 252 pounds in 12:38 with a cross-body block off the top rope. Walker did 2 high leapfrogs, but looked really green most of the way. Both guys kept the pacing at a fair clip, but a lot of spots were missed. There were some near falls as they picked things up toward the end. Walker showed some potential. 1 1/4 stars. 3. The Berserker pinned Jim Brunzell in 11:10 with a power slam. Brunzell was a sub for Kerry Von Erich, who was in the building but in absolutely no physical or mental condition to walk, let alone wrestle. They also kept the pace going decent, but it was still a bad match. 3/4 star. 4. Hogan beat Flair via countout in 6:59. There's a lot one could say bad about this match, particularly when the main event involving Flair is the shortest match on the entire show. Hogan didn't sell a thing for the first 3:21 and looked awful. At that point, Mr. Perfect distracted Hogan so Flair could get the advantage, which lasted all of one move, a back suplex that Hogan didn't sell. Hogan missed a leg drop at 4 minutes and Perfect, who Hogan did sell for, then rammed his leg into the ring post and worked over the leg. Flair put on the figure 4, which Hogan reversed and came back with the Superman comeback. The two wound up outside the ring. Hogan posted Flair and jumped in to beat the count. Flair squeezed just about all his regular spots into 7 minutes, and it was the fastest-paced, most exciting match on the show with great heat. This had nowhere near the heat based on anticipation that their match 3 weeks ago had, but the entire place was on its feet during the last 2 minutes. The shortness and the cheap finish left one with a real bad taste, even though the crowd did get into the shortened version of Hogan's posing routine after the match. There were noticeably more boos than usual when Hogan posed, and I don't think it was because Flair has his fans. The Flair fans at the first show, Flair banners, etc. seemed to almost completely be absent this time, by the way. Clearly the last show drew a lot of new older wrestling fans to see the dream match, and the vast majority didn't like overall what they saw and didn't come back. 2.5 stars. 5. Legion of Doom and Jim Duggan beat the Mountie and Natural Disasters in 12:42 when Hawk pinned Typhoon. When Mountie went to hit Hawk with the 2x4, Hawk ducked, and Typhoon got it. Mostly comedy and stalling. Duggan at least looked like he was having a good time. Lots of long beer hugs by the dinosaur duo. The heels teased a breakup spot after the match, which got a lot of heat. Dud. 6. Hercules pinned Greg Valentine in 11:17. After seeing them 3 weeks ago in Sacramento, I didn't think they could possibly get any worse, but they did. Geez, doesn't Hercules at least take pride in his job? 3.5 stars. 7. Virgil pinned Ted DiBiase in 8:30 with a roll-up from behind when Sherry grabbed the belt from the timekeeper and DiBiase was about to grab it and Virgil got him from behind. DiBiase was real good. This wasn't as good as Hogan Flair, but it was a solid match and not the least bit disappointing like Hogan Flair. 2.5 stars. This is the first issue of the current 4-issue set. If you got a 1 on your address label, it means that your Observer subscription will expire in 3 more weeks. Renewal rates remain $6 for 4 issues, $12 for 8, $24 for 16, $36 for 24, $48 for 32 up through $60 for 40 issues within the United States and Canada. Overseas rates are $9 for each set of 4 issues up through $90 for 40 issues. Subscription renewals, letters to the editor, arena results, news items and any other correspondence can be sent to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, P.O. Box 1228 Campbell, California 950091228. Fax messages can be sent to the Observer at 408-378-6562 afternoon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. EMLL. The November 15th card at Arena Mexico in Mexico City saw the debut of the Love Machine, Art Barr under a hood, with a video. Love Machine working as a babyface, then teamed with Black Magic, Norman Smiley, and Mascara Sagrada to win 2 of 3 falls from Blue Panther and Jerry Estrada and Pierre Roth Jr. in 2042 and 1/4 stars when Machine pinned Panther in the 3rd fall with an air pillman type maneuver. Anibal and Pero Aguayo and Liz Mark won 2 straight falls from the Dynamite Brothers, Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000, in 1804 when Universo was disqualified in the 2nd fall. Dud. Next came a 4-man captain's battle royal to determine the pairings for the semi-final matches in the CMLL World Trios Championship Tournament. The 4 men were Octagon, for the team of Octagon and Dandy and Conan, Brazo de Oro, for Los Brazos, Satanico, for the New Infernales, and Atlantis, for Atlantis and Super Astro and Angel Azteca. It only lasted 1:59 before Octagon and Satanico were pinned, which means their teams went on first. The New Infernales, Satanico and MS1 and Parata Morgan, won the match over Octagon and Dandy and Conan in 11:27 when MS1 pinned Conan 2 in 1/4 stars. The main event saw Los Brazos beat Atlantis and Azteca and Astro in 9:19 when Brazo de Oro pinned Atlantis, which sets up the championship match this Friday night. The opener, which wasn't televised, saw Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada face Tanya the Warrior and Pantera Serena. Los Angeles wrestler superstar, who used to wrestle in Los Angeles as Relampago Azul, is headed in. Also coming in is a wrestler called Arafat. November 10th at Arena Mexico saw MS1 and Satanico and Morgan beat Massacre and Jacques Made and Pierroth Jr. in a battle of heel teams when the commissioner stopped the match because of Massacre bleeding too badly to continue. For years Massacre was partners with MS1 and Satanico as the original Infernales. The Ultimate Dragon Yoshihiro Asai was again set to debut on that show but hadn't arrived back from Japan in time. La Fiera has turned back heel. We've received more details on the death of referee Gran Davis, David Patino. Davis, who was 57, we incorrectly reported his age at 51 last week, refereed the November 3rd show at Arena Mexico headlined by Cien Caras defending his CMLL World Heavyweight title against Conan. The third fall saw Conan disqualified for hitting Davis after Caras gave Conan a few low blows in front of Davis, but Davis, the heel ref, kept refusing to call for the DQ. He already felt ill when he was at the show, but he worked it anyway since he was the focal point of the main event finish. He went home after the match, but started having a terrible headache and called for an ambulance at 10:30 p.m. He never recovered, and was pronounced dead at 4:15 a.m. from the brain hemorrhage. Davis wrestled from 1955 through 1980 when he retired to become a referee and held regional titles in Mexico as a middleweight during the 1960s. UWA. November 10th at El Toreo in Naucalpan saw Ricky Santana and Gigante Warrior, Butchmasters, and Miguelito Perez win 2 out of 3 falls from Canek and the Killer and Fishman when Perez pinned Canek in the third fall after hitting him with a foreign object, which sets up a Canek vs. Perez match for the UWA World Heavyweight title. Also Enrique Vieira and Dos Caras and Villano 3 beat El Signo and Negro Navarro and Negro Casas, Tamba and Solar and El Cicotalico beat the England and El Caballo Loco and Scorpio, the New Fantastics, Kendo and Katana and Blackman 2, beat Angel Mortal and El Bello Greco and Ray Cobra via DQ plus midgets in the opener. Most of the shows this past week were headlined by heel vs. heel 6-man main events. November 11th in Puebla had Canek and Fishman and Casas vs. Santana and Warrior and Perez. However, on November 15th in Netzahualcoyot, Canek and Warrior teamed up together. They've been feuding against Tinieblas Sr. and Jr. Casas, Caras and Cicotalico all appeared on November 15th in Tijuana. Casas defends the UWA World Middleweight title against Ruben Garcia on November 20th in Netzahualcoyot. Canek vs. Perez title match is set for November 24th at El Toreo. Expect Perez to lose that match, surprise, surprise, since he's leaving Mexico after the show, as is Warrior. Danny Davis, Tony Anthony and Coquina debuted on this past Sunday's card at El Toreo. A press conference was to be held on Monday, November 18th, to announce that the El Toreo cards would start airing on local television each week starting this coming Saturday from noon to 2 p.m. In response, the union called for a citywide meeting of all wrestlers at 10:30 a.m. on Saturday morning to discuss this issue. Gran Hamada and Pero Aguayo will defend the UWA Tag Team titles against Black Power and El Signo shortly. Japan TV Rundown. October 27th, All Japan, 1. Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey beat Joe and Dean Malenko in 7 minutes when Hansen pinned Dean with a lariat. They kept moving but the size difference hurt the match because Hansen and Spivey didn't sell much. 1 3/4 stars, 2. Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao and Masafuchi beat Kena Kobashi and Toshiaki Kawada and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi in 28-33. This was nowhere near the level of most of the matches these guys have. The match technically was very good, but the lack of crowd heat actually made it drag during the first half. It was slower paced than you'd expect as well. Kobashi and Kikuchi sold a lot during the body of the match, but didn't get the usual heat. Kobashi got a bloody nose at one point. The last 7 minutes were all the hot moves and near falls one after another. It turned into a very exciting match at the end, finishing with Tao pinning Kikuchi after a short clothesline. 3 1/2 stars. November 3rd, All Japan, 1. Fuchi beat Dan Crawford in 21-40 to retain the PWF World Junior Heavyweight title. Crawford opened early doing all of his hot moves and getting lots of near falls in the portion of the match that didn't air on television. Fuchi came back and worked over Crawford's knee from about the 7 minutes mark on. Crawford selling the pain in his knee was as good, if not better than Ric Flair at his best. He was a total babyface in that he'd make comebacks and Fuchi would continually cut him off by kicking the bad knee that all the fans know he had surgery on last year. I can't describe how great Crawford was in this match and how perfectly Fuchi worked it. Doug Furness came to ringside. A great spot saw Fuchi have Crawford in a half-crab submission and the ref was checking to see if Crawford was going to submit, but he wouldn't. Finally Furness threw in the towel for his partner, but Crawford, caught in the hold, grabbed the towel and threw it back at Furness before the ref turned around and saw it. Furness kept making comebacks on one leg and being cut off until finally the ref just stopped the match, ruling Crawford couldn't continue. 4 1/4 stars, 2. Tsuruta pinned Kawada in 1905 to retain the Triple Crown. The crowd enthusiasm was super and the psychology was perfect for a world title match. There weren't a lot of incredible high spots, but it was stiff, back and forth realistic work using a lot of holds that the crowd has been educated to believe are potential finishers like facelocks and sleepers, so the heat was all the way. Tsuruta won clean with a back suplex and a bridge, and the crowd gave both men huge ovations after the match. 4.5 stars. Oregon. Headliners Billy Jack Haynes and Demolition Crush both missed the card on November 16 in Portland. Haynes was suspended for 1 week, but the real reason was the two were booked by Joel Goodhart for a Northwest title match, won by Crush, that same night in Chichester, Pennsylvania. The interesting thing about the match was that Crush worked as the heel and Haynes as the babyface, the opposite of their Portland roles. Brickhouse Brown showed up for his debut Saturday night but only did interviews since he hadn't had time to get his physical. Results saw the Bruise brothers, Ron and Don Harris, beat Jesse Barr and John Rambo when Barr was pinned after being double-teamed. Steve Dahl beat Moondog Moretti via DQ when Dahl had him in the sleeper when both Bruise brothers ran in for the DQ. After the match they once again tried to tar and feather Dahl, however Grappler made the save. This set up a tag match for November 23 with Dahl and Grappler versus Bruise brothers, with the losers to get tarred and feathered. C.W. Bergstrom beat Mike Miller via DQ and Miller threw him over the top rope. It appears Miller is about to turn heel. The Grappler beat Dirty White Boy Bobby Blair, who doubles as Grappler's real-life landlord. The main gimmick match was Al Madrill versus Mike Winner, with each man tied up and scissors put in the middle of the ring. Bergstrom tied up Madrill while Moretti tied up Winner. Madrill got untied first and tried to cut Winner's hair with the scissors, but eventually Winner untied himself and both guys had chunks of hair cut off as they fought back and forth with the scissors and also traded chair shots. The finish saw Bergstrom hit Madrill with a chair and Winner pinned Madrill. Winner finished the night by winning a battle royal by eliminating White Boy and Moretti. Crush vs. Haynes headlines next week. USWA. Newcomers this week were the Spirit of America, Randy Lewis, and the Gravedigger managed by Nate the Rat, who definitely isn't Roadblock as we speculated he'd be last week. The Spirit's gimmick rivals Chip the Firebreaker as the lamest gimmick of the year. His gimmick is he cleans up garbage on the highways. They debuted him showing a video from a park where Eric Embry and Tony Falk were littering and Spirit cleaned up the garbage after they were gone. Anyway, if they did this on April 1st nobody would believe this. This led to a grudge match with Spirit against Falk on television, and after Spirit pinned Falk, he put him in a garbage can and then clotheslined Embry when he tried to interfere. Gravedigger debuted and was a horrible imitation of Undertaker. After beating jobber Chris Frazier, he put him in a body bag and Nate then put a rat inside the body bag as well. Jeff Jarrett had a television match against Billy Travis. The finish saw a ref bump, then Embry interfered and hit Jarrett with Travis' guitar. However, it took forever for Travis to get the ref to come over and count, and as Travis was helping the ref, Jarrett pulled out a chain and hit Travis with it and pinned him. Jarrett was pretty much a babyface during his interviews on television and will be teaming with Jerry Lawler in a tag team tournament this week, and said he still wants to wrestle Lawler, but that Lawler would be the best partner possible for him. November 11th in Memphis saw Travis beat Freezer Thompson, Tom Pritchard pinned Falk, Jarrett pinned Tony Anthony, Doug Masters and Bart Sawyer beat Robert Fuller and Jimmy Valiant to keep the USWA tag team titles. Embry no contest with Kimala to keep the Southern title, and Lawler and Bill Dundee beat the Super Team, Jeff Gaylord and a wrestler known only as Travis Revenge, the Big O, via a reversed decision disqualification. November 12th in Louisville saw Anthony beat Steve Marino, Masters and Sawyer beat Jarrett and Fuller to keep the tag team titles when Embry hit Jarrett with the guitar, Valiant pinned Sawyer, Pritchard beat Embry, Lawler beat Gaylord and Jarrett won a Rumble Battle Royal. The November 18th card is billed as a tag team tournament, with the winning team getting $100,000 and a trip to Japan for the tag team tournament, which is difficult since the tournament began 3 days earlier. Anyway, first round matches were Dundee and Spirit of America versus the Super Team, Dutch Mantell and Fuller versus Travis and Gravedigger, Kimala and Embry versus Fuller and Valiant, and Lawler and Jarrett versus Masters and Sawyer. Figure Jarrett and Lawler going to the finals and splitting up after losing. The reason Valiant dropped about 50 or 60 pounds a while back and is so light now is because he became a vegetarian. Global. The November 15th show at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 775 fans for 3 hours of television taping. The show that airs December 3rd on ESPN has Bull Payne pinning Ben Jordan, Sam Houston over Buster Blackheart, Tug Taylor and Terry Garvin over Barry Horowitz and Ed Robinson in Minister Mystery, Chaz, beat Tom Davis via DQ when Mike Davis interfered. Chaz pulled off his mask at the bell. Taylor, his father, and Garvin made the save. ESPN show for December 10th has Horowitz pinning Terry Daniels. Horowitz is now billing himself as the winner Barry Horowitz, and will probably never win another match and continue to do jobs on WWF television, as well most likely. Mike and Tom Davis beat Rick Guerin and Jordan. Payne pinned Houston. Samantha attacked Houston a few times early and was banished from ringside, so Chris Love returned as Payne's manager. Love interfered, leading to Payne's win. For ESPN on December 11th, the California Connection, Rod Price and John Tatum, beat Black Bart and Bill Irwin when Price hit Bart with his own branding iron. Tom and Mike Davis beat Taylor and Garvin via DQ when Chaz hit Mike with a chair. In a dark segment just for house show fans, Bart then challenged Price to a bull rope match. Price and Tatum then came to the ring. Bart said he was going to remove his clothes, stitch by stitch, until Price agreed to the match. Bart even took off his tights, revealing a second pair of leotards. He took off his boot. Bart then grabbed the mic and said he only had one piece of clothing left and told Price if he didn't get in the ring, "You'll have to look at me buck naked, you California piece of shit." Price then hit the ring and the two started their bull rope match, which ended with Bart winning. November 22nd at the Sportatorium has Davis Brothers vs. Taylor and Garvin in a no DQ match. Price vs. Bart in a bull rope match in which using both the branding iron and nunchucks will be legal. A global tag team title match scheduled with Steve Simpson and Chris Walker, who is no longer with Global and won't be there, versus California Connection. Sweet Daddy Falcone vs. the Rattlesnake, Jeff Rates, Tatum vs. Simpson, Falcone, and Price vs. Irwin and Rattlesnake. Bart vs. Payne, and the debut of a newcomer called the Body Snatcher. The following week will be Global's biggest show in Dallas since it started with Patriot, Del Wilkes, versus Scott Anthony for the North American title, a global tag team title match, Lightning Kid vs. Chaz for the global light heavyweight title, Davis Brothers vs. Taylor and Garvin in a cage match, Payne vs. Houston, Falcone vs. Irwin and Gary Young vs. Horowitz. Debuting on November 29th will be Bad Company Pat Tanaka and Chris Champion, managed by Love. Scott Hudson's role in the promotion will be changing as he'll go from a color commentary role to working with Steven DeTruth, Steve Prozik, on Point Counterpoint, reprising their roles on the CH69 Saturday Night Wrestling block in Atlanta. They did a few segments in Atlanta that were so hilarious, but I don't think they can get away with some of that stuff nationally. But one of the first segments will include a candid discussion of talking about eliminating bleeding in wrestling because of the AIDS potential and talking about steroid usage. Here and there. Gordon Scozzari's American Wrestling Federation Indies show, which is pretty well loaded with name talent, switched its debut December 15th television taping from Long Island University to Rutgers University's Newark, New Jersey campus. The show will have a tournament for the AWF title, with first-round matches being Steve Williams vs. Hercules Ayala, Dan Spivey vs. Stan Lane, Paul Orndorff vs. Adrian Street, Eddie Gilbert vs. Sunny Beach, Ron Garvin vs. Bob Orton, and Nikita Koloff vs. Coco Ware. Also there will be a tag match with Junkyard Dog and Pez Whatley vs. The Sheik and Sabu. Scozzari claims the TV will start in February on 4 stations, one of which is a national network, rumored to be the Family Channel on cable. Beach, Gilbert, and Dutch Mantel will be the bookers. They also have a house show scheduled for January 24th in New York at the Penta with a scheduled lineup of Koloff vs. Orndorff, Sheik and Sabu vs. Fantastics, Williams vs. Stan Hansen, Rick Steamboat vs. Spivey, Ala vs. Nikolai Volkov, Jeff Gaylord vs. Barry Horowitz and Gilbert. Ronnie Gossett will work as manager boss hog of Bob Orton. The latest on regulating wrestling in Florida is that a 90-minute meeting which will discuss both gaming regulations and wrestling regulations is set for December 10th, when a bill will be introduced and debated on. It is expected that the WWF will have a representative, local lobbyist James Tillman, speak against regulation at the meeting. WCW hasn't contacted any local lobbyists about representing them, so it appears they aren't going to have any representatives speak against regulation, and the company is going to sit back and let the WWF fight the fight. It is also expected that any actual decisions, because of the limited time frame, will be postponed until more debating with more different speakers takes place on January 14th. Joel Goodhart held a press conference over the weekend to announce his January 25, 1992 lineup for Pennsylvania Hall in Philadelphia as Buddy Landel vs. Buddy Rogers for the TWA heavyweight title, Steve Williams and Terry Gordy vs. Doug Furness and Dan Crawford, Owen Hart vs. Shiro Koshinaka. Goodhart insisted that match would take place even though Hart recently signed a WWF contract. Kevin Sullivan vs. Eddie Gilbert in a ring surrounded by fan lumberjacks on 3 sides, but if they brawl out the 4th side they can go anywhere in the building and falls count anywhere in the building, and the Black Hearts defending the TWA title. Bam Bam Bigelow is out of action recovering from knee surgery but should be back by early December. Iqua drew 200 on November 14 at the Tampa Sportatorium as Coconut Man beat Mark Starr in a loser leaves town match, so Starr can go to the FMW Tag Team Tournament. Rocky Johnson beat Sonny King. The Long Riders, Billy Mack and Tex Salinger, beat Kenny Kendall and Rick Van Damme in a Florida Tag Team title match. Dick Slater beat Hurricane Walker and Pat Tanaka kept the light heavyweight title, winning 2 out of 3 falls from Jimmy Backlund, with the final fall coming on a DQ. Backlund DDT'd the ref after the match. Among the names announced as headed in during the card were Coco Ware, Johnny Stewart, and Kevin Sullivan. John Arezzi and Rich Mancuso are scheduled to begin a weekly television show called Pro Wrestling Today on WWE'S, a UHF television station in New York City that airs on CH 44 in Long Island, CH 38 in New York City, and CH 54 in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. It'll be a 1-hour show every Saturday from 4 to 5 p.m., and the starting date is tentatively set for December 14th. Although it may be pushed back to January 4, 1992, and it has a 13-week starting commitment. Dick Slater appears to be the first-named wrestler who will work with Eddie Mansfield's IWF. LPWA's television tapings set for November 30th in Jackson, Tennessee and December 28th in Panama City, Florida. 4 JWP wrestlers, 2 of which will likely be Devil Masami and Dynamite Kansai, are scheduled for Panama City. Lucha Libre shows that were being held weekly in Long Beach, California have been moved to Saturday nights at Don Juan Village, 13158 6th Street, in Chino, California. Steve Gator Wolf promoted shows November 4th in Greasewood, Arizona, drawing 250, November 5th in Many Farms, Arizona, drawing 450, November 6th in Saley, Arizona, drawing 350, and November 7th in Technos Pass, Arizona, drawing 350 using the Mercenary, Billy Anderson, Louis Piccoli, Sheik Abdullah Hussein, Lou Fabiano, and light heavyweights David Electric Youth Gibson and Jason Peters. Gator Wolf has a show scheduled for July 4, 1992 with a ring set up on a monument on the border of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, so it'll be the first wrestling matches ever held in 4 states simultaneously. Lendell Wahoo McDaniel and Brad Anderson all worked for the Southern Wrestling Association on November 9 in Gaston, North Carolina. The Mercenaries headed to the FMW Tag Team Tournament will be Anderson and Fabiano. Bob Bradley Sr., no relation to the WWF jobber of the same name, and Jesse Hernandez. Western States Wrestling Association drew 500 on November 9 in San Bernardino with Electric Youth. Spicoli aired Jason Anderson, Peters. Bill Anderson in the main event had Dr. Dream, Bradley Sr., and Scott Cole beating Black Ninja, Bradley Jr., and Black Nightmare, Scott Basso. In Evander Holyfield's November 23 title defense at the Omni, his new opponent Burt Cooper is managed by pro wrestling promoter Rob Rusin. The HBO fight was originally scheduled as Holyfield vs. Francesco Damiani, and before that as a pay-per-view spectacular with Holyfield vs. Mike Tyson from Las Vegas a few days earlier, but Damiani suffered a training injury and had to pull out. The first Glow television taping in years is set for November 23 at the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas. WCW. Since this is being written before The Clash, but you'll all be reading it after The Clash, it is pretty much expected that Rick Steamboat debuted on the show as Dustin Rhodes' tag team partner against the Enforcers. Apparently WCW sent a letter to the WWF asking them to respond if they felt they had contractual ties with Steamboat that would prevent him from working with WCW, and they didn't respond, so WCW is going to use him. Steamboat had signed a 2-year contract with WWF, but there was a claim by his attorney that the contract was breached in 2 areas. Since technically, Steamboat was fired by the WWF for not doing 2 TV jobs, even though he had given notice he was going to quit, that by being fired, it would relinquish him from the contract. The combination of bringing in Steamboat with the recent addition of Rick Rude really gives the company a major shot in the arm when it badly needed it. Derek Dukes had a tryout on November 12 in Albany, Georgia. Jim Ross, PN News, and Johnny B. Bad spent last week in England doing promotional work for the December 8 to 15th tour. There was serious consideration given last week to putting the WCW belt on Rick Steiner at the Clash. Apparently Lex Luger's contract, running from March to March, specifies a certain number of live dates, and he'd been booked so heavily over the first 8 months of the year that at his present pace, whatever the number is, he'd reach it just about by the end of the year. So in order to keep him working the major towns until the new fiscal year of the contract, Luger is being pulled from all smaller shows. I'm not sure if this relates to that same clause, with the clause regarding his contract being valid only for the US and Canada, which allowed him to skip the March show at the Tokyo Egg Dome because his contract didn't specifically cover Japan, but he also refused to work the England tour since it wasn't covered by his contract, and there was heat regarding that. Super Brawl 2 is set for May 17, 1992 in Jacksonville. The Charlotte Observer ran a page-and-a-half story on Arnold Anderson this past Friday. November 14 in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew 1,300 as Diamond Stud pinned Bobby Eaton Arachneman. Brad Armstrong pinned Richard Morton. Arachneman beat Thomas Rich via DQ. Freebirds beat Patriots. Steiners beat Enforcers via DQ. Luger pinned Bill Kazmaier and Sting beat Cactus Jack in a cage match. Apparently in the wake of the Magic Johnson story, WCW has instituted a total blood ban both at TV and arenas. Sting and Cactus ran cage matches in several cities without blood, and in fact, Cactus actually had a fresh cut from a few nights earlier and taped it heavily to make sure it didn't accidentally break open. Jushin Liger vs. Brian Pillman set for Christmas week in several cities. Lady Blossom should be history by the time you read this, and Steve Austin will be part of the Dangerous Alliance. Teddy Long is being phased out and will no longer be managing Johnny B. Bad, although since he's under contract until March, he may pop up here and there. There is going to be some sort of change regarding the York Foundation. I've heard various conflicting stories regarding the future of all four members. November 16 in Charleston, South Carolina drew 1,500 as Arachneman pinned Rich, Stud and Morton beat Eaton and Brian Pillman with Eaton turning on Pillman. Freebirds beat Patriots. Dustin Rhodes and Mike Graham beat Terrence Taylor and Rich. Steiners beat Enforcers via DQ. Sting beat Jack and Luger pinned Tom Zank. November 17 in Greensboro drew 750 as Arachneman pinned Graham Dud. Freebirds beat Patriots 1 star. Eaton pinned Stud 1 star. Rhodes pinned Rich Dud. Pillman and Big Josh beat Taylor and Morton 1 star. Taylor and Morton broke up after the match with Morton turning babyface. Although that may be just for this night. Steiners beat Enforcers via DQ 1 star. Luger pinned Kazmaier 1 star and Sting beat Jack in a cage match 3 stars. The funniest thing on the show, and maybe on any live show in a long time, came during the Sting-Jack match, apparently a rib thought up by Sting. Jack came to the ring with a towel. During the match he went for the towel and pulled out a foreign object from the towel, a squeegee. When Sting saw it, he sold it like it was a shotgun and acted totally panicked trying to escape from the cage. Jack ended up using it on Sting, who sold the blows huge. Sting used it on Jack as well and ended up tossing it to the crowd. It should also be noted that our friends at Front Row Section D earlier in the show had brought out several cardboard cutouts of squeegees which nearly sent Graham and Pillman into stitches. November 15 in Charlotte drew 800 as Freebirds beat Patriots 1 star, Arachneman pinned David Isley 1 star, Stud and Morton beat Pillman and Eaton when Eaton turned on Pillman 1 1/2 star, Rhodes and Graham beat Taylor and Rich 3 stars, Luger pinned Kazmaier 1 1/2 star, Steiners beat Enforcers via DQ 1/2 star and Sting beat Jack in a cage match 2.5 stars. WWF. The December 14th show at Aloha Stadium in Honolulu is scheduled as Hogan vs. Flair, Legion of Doom vs. Natural Disasters, Roddy Piper vs. DiBiase, Rockers vs. Nasty Boys, Jimmy Snuka vs. Rick Martel, Benichiro Tenryu vs. Haku, British Bulldog vs. Berserker and Kerry Von Erich vs. Great Kabuki. Martel, Tenryu, Haku and Kabuki are only working the show in Honolulu and a card that same week in Guam but won't be working WWF mainland dates. Del Wilkes, Patriot in Global, received a tryout at television and may have already been offered a contract. Chris Walker has already been put on house show cards, while Owen Hart has signed a contract. Hart debuted under his own name as part of a tag team called the New Foundation with Jim Neidhart, and will appear at the next TV tapings as well and start at the house shows early next year when the team will probably work a program with the Beverly Brothers. Flair has matches taped exclusively for Coliseum Video at the December taping against Shawn Michaels, and at the January taping against Ted DiBiase. Wrestling Challenge taping on November 12 in Springfield, Massachusetts before a sellout 8,900 saw Wilkes beat Brooklyn Brawler in a dark match. Nothing special. New Foundation debuted. Stupid-looking ring costumes, but Hart was impressive. They are running an angle where Bret Hart will be named 1991 WWF Wrestler of the Year and Mountie and Jimmy Hart protest they didn't get the award. Mountie also challenged anyone in the house to fight him and Sergeant Slaughter came out, although this didn't work to perfection, as it did the previous night. Big Bully Bisage's history as he sent a letter of resignation in and no-showed television. He'll be replaced by Hercules at Survivors. Warlord also missed all dates over this past week and was replaced by Barbarian. At Challenge, Hart pinned Barbarian, subbing for Warlord, 2 3/4 stars. Jameson was introduced as the Bushwhackers' good luck charm for their program with Beverly Brothers, and will work spots with the Genius. Flair came out managed by Mr. Perfect with the new belt. Undertaker pinned Jim Duggan 1 1/2 star. Slaughter and Duggan worked as a tag team. They'll be working a program with Nasty Boys in early 1992. Legion of Doom beat Natural Disasters via DQ when Nasty Boys interfered. Jake Roberts beat Randy Savage via DQ 1 1/2 star. Hogan beat Flair via countout in 14:52 3 stars. Flair had 50% of the cheers. Superstars taping on November 13 in New Haven saw Jameson in the front row and being focused on the entire taping to get him over. El Matador beat Berserker via DQ 1/2 star. IRS challenged any man in the house and Sarge came out. To make sure Sarge was cheered when he came out later in the show as this stuff isn't tape. To a big reaction, Fred Blassie and Mean Gene gave Hart the Wrestler of the Year award. Savage pinned Roberts when Jake was distracted by Sid Justice, who came to ringside with his arm in a cast 3/4 star. Flair beat Hart via countout in 1920 in a bout for Coliseum Video 3 3/4 stars. Both were brawling outside the ring when Perfect held Hart outside while Flair jumped in to beat the count. Said to be a very good match but a weak ending. Beverly Brothers attacked Jameson in the stands, ripping his jacket and breaking his glasses until the Bushwhackers made the save. Undertaker got a heavy babyface reaction during his squash match. Time for dubbing fake crowd noise, I guess. Rockers matches contained more hints of the turn. Load beat Disasters via DQ in a bad match, and the main event saw Hogan beat Undertaker via DQ and Paul Bearer interfered in just 3:17 4 stars. The Cobra will be taken from Jake Roberts, I believe from a Jack Tunney ruling, since it didn't appear with Jake during his TV squash matches, with the announcement in both cities that it was missing somewhere in the building, which I'm sure thrilled the fans live. Speaking of confusion, it must have confused the fans live when they hear that Neidhart is injured and will miss Survivors when he did all those squash matches. Primetime Wrestling has a new format with Vince McMahon back on the show as moderator of debates on current WWF issues, with Bobby Heenan and Mr. Perfect representing the heels, and Gorilla Monsoon and Piper representing the faces. From all reports, this new format is a huge improvement. The old format was dying in the ratings. November 14 in Providence drew 2,500 as Chris Chavez pinned Skinner Dud. Bulldog drew IRS 2 stars. Beverly Brothers beat Rockers 1 3/4 stars. Savage pinned Roberts with an elbow drop off the top rope 2 stars. Hart pinned Barbarian 2 stars. Undertaker pinned Bossman when he used the urn 2 3/4 stars, and Bushwhackers beat Nasty Boys via DQ for using a chair 1 1/2 star. November 14 in Portland, Oregon drew 7,000 as Matador pinned Mustafa. Chris Walker pinned Kato. Berserker pinned Valentine. Hogan beat Flair via countout, 2 stars. Load DDQ Natural Disasters. Von Erich pinned Hercules. Virgil pinned DiBiase and Duggan pinned Mountie. The Arsenio Hall show on November 21 will feature a live match with Load vs Nasty Boys to help build up for the Survivors pay-per-view show. November 15 in Hershey, Pennsylvania drew 3,000 as Chavez pinned Skinner. Undertaker pinned Bulldog. Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers. Savage pinned Roberts. Hart pinned Barbarian. Bossman pinned IRS and Nasty Boys beat Rockers. November 16 in Anaheim drew 6,300 as Walker pinned Kato. Santana pinned Mustafa. Berserker pinned Valentine. Duggan and Legion of Doom beat Mountie and Natural Disasters. Hercules pinned Jim Brunzel. Virgil pinned DiBiase and Hogan beat Flair via countout. Same crew worked a PM show in San Diego that drew just shy of a sellout 7,000, and on November 17 in Fresno drew 5,000. November 16 at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland drew 3,800 as Chavez pinned Skinner. Nasty Boys beat Bushwhackers. Undertaker pinned Bulldog. Bossman pinned IRS. Hart pinned Barbarian. Savage pinned Roberts, and Beverly Brothers beat Rockers. Expect Elizabeth to go on the road with Savage after Thanksgiving. November 17 in Syracuse drew 3,200 as Chavez pinned Skinner. Undertaker pinned Bulldog. Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers. Roddy Piper pinned Roberts. Hart pinned Barbarian. Bossman pinned IRS. Best match on card, and Nasty Boys beat Rockers. November 3 in Moline, Illinois drew a sellout 6,500. Sold out well in advance as Matador pinned Hercules 1 star. Skinner pinned Snuka 3 stars. Mountie beat Bulldog via countout 1 star. Load beat Disasters via DQ 2 stars. IRS pinned Bossman 3 stars, and Hogan beat Flair via countout 3 1/2 stars. November 3 in Champaign, Illinois drew 6,300 as Skinner pinned Snuka. Mountie beat Bulldog via countout. Matador pinned Hercules. Load beat Disasters via DQ. IRS pinned Bossman, and Hogan beat Flair via countout. The readers' pages. Nicholas Babbo of 10,223 Martz Road, Ypsilanti, Michigan 48197 is looking for any tapes from All Japan Women's Wrestling and also tapes of WWF and WCW house shows, particularly from Detroit. Boyce Johansson of 5,424 Watts, 69th Avenue, Arvada, Colorado 80003 has a listing of wrestling merchandise for sale of hundreds of magazines, newsletters and photos. $1 gets you the list. Joe Pinkins of 99 Brent Street, Albany, New York 12205 is looking to get in touch with anyone selling pro wrestling tapes, books, autographs, programs, or any other memorabilia. Lena Sargent of 12 Spring Street, Gainesville, Georgia 30501 is looking for the May TWA show, Mike Lano's television show, the August 10th and August 11th New Japan shows, and the 5/6th New Japan show, along with any Mansfield IWF tapes. He can trade for those tapes with tapes from all areas from his collection. Clint Freeman of 196E. 75th Street, New York 10021 has a huge listing of videotapes for trade and is selling hundreds of old pro wrestling magazines. T. Davis of 4392 Old Mulkey Road, Tompkinsville, Kentucky 42167 is looking for early tapes of the Rockers and Ric Flair and wrestling or football trading cards and any current Kentucky, Tennessee and Florida independent tapes. Hogan. I just can't stay silent any longer when it comes to Hulk Hogan. I'd like to give you information that isn't of general public knowledge. In July of 1986, an aneurysm, a weak connection between an artery and a vein in my brain, ruptured, causing brain damage. After 2 brain surgeries, the first performed while I was in a coma, I had to come to terms with a very scary reality that I was no longer the same person I was before the head injury. The brain damage had left deficits that impaired my physical, motor and cognitive skills. What I needed was courage to get me through my emotional and psychological trauma so I could concentrate on my various therapies. I got that courage by listening to Hulk Hogan, and in doing so, gained an understanding of the philosophy of Hulkamania. Hulk Hogan defines the word courage, digging down deep inside oneself to find the inner strength to face insurmountable obstacles encountered during life. This is how I was able to face my challenges and do what I had to do. If I didn't have Hulk Hogan as my hero and role model, I wouldn't be here right now. In the spring of 1989, I achieved one of my goals. I met Hulk Hogan. I was told by the WWF that their policy didn't permit any publicity of the meeting. I watched as Hulk met a number of terminally ill children whose wish to meet their hero was arranged by the WWF through charity foundations such as Make-A-Wish and Starlight. It was an incredible thing to watch these kids meet him. It was as if someone pressed a switch and a light bulb lit up inside of them. Hulk talked to them and took pictures with them. It was an experience that imprinted in their minds and hearts forever. I see millions of fans that enjoy pro wrestling and Hulk Hogan. More important, if terminally ill children enjoy watching pro wrestling and use Hulk Hogan as a role model so they can face the obstacles and challenges that life has dealt them, would deem the press the judicial body to challenge that? In the fall of 1989, I reached another of my goals, to be accepted into college and receive a strong college education that I feel is necessary to become a psychologist working head-injured patients. By using Hogan as a role model, since he was a college graduate, I would be one too. I can honestly say that I owe Hogan a debt of gratitude for helping me to become the person that I am today. I'll never feel that the words thank you will ever cover how I feel toward him, my admiration, deep respect, loyalty and love. I owe him more than I can ever repay. Anita Apt. Forest Hills, New York. Hark back to my letter of a few months back about how I felt the Zarian trial would affect the business, and I think you'll find it pretty accurate. A few comments. I don't think it was fair to print the dates and the weights of the packages that Hulk Hogan received, since he never admitted on the stand that he received steroids from Zarian, if you aren't going to print the names of all the wrestlers who received packages and their respective weights. I didn't think that information should be released in the first place, since the wrestlers weren't on trial. If that's all the evidence they had on Hogan, there is no way they can prove what was in the packages if it's Hogan's word against Zarian's, and Hogan said he's clean. I don't expect wrestlers to potentially wreck their careers by being honest about how current their steroid usage is in light of the witch hunt ethics of the media. Would you actually blow multi-million-dollar merchandising deals or a chance to get out of wrestling via Hollywood by being honest because of the bad PR it would cause? Admittedly, Hogan has crossed the line of self-protection. Indeed, he's been trumpeting an anti-steroid stance, which is laughable at best. I just don't want to see other wrestlers get fried because Hogan is heading for a blast furnace, and he may take Vince McMahon with him if Vince doesn't tell him to shut up. Since I don't have a court transcript, I hope the wrestlers who testified said that every Federal Express package they received from Zarian contained steroids, since this was implied in the Observer. You should know Federal Express rounds off to the next highest pound in determining billing and weight. If a package weighs a little over 1 pound, it will be listed and billed as 2 pounds. The actual weight of the drugs that the wrestlers received is nebulous at best when you take into account you don't know the weight of the packing. Also, what was the ratio of painkillers, vitamins and other drugs, which certainly varied by the individual. As for the doctor's comments about 2 shots per week being normal for bodybuilders, he should have mentioned at what dosage. I was under the impression that bodybuilders were taking a lot more than just 2 shots of decadurabolin per week and that they are stacking steroids, which many within the medical profession consider to be more dangerous than overusing one drug. For frame of reference, if you have this information, you should give what you consider an average dosage of steroids that wrestlers are on, if there is such a thing. Has Zarian been sentenced yet, or does this not happen when you appeal? Halcion is not marketed as a painkiller. It is prescribed for insomnia, although being a skeletal muscle relaxer, it has that effect. Halcion is currently at the heart of a big debate over whether it should be taken off the market because of the dangerous psychological side effects that some people experience, including one case of a patient killing a relative because of it. It was featured as the cover story on Newsweek a few weeks back. Teresa DeMarie, Tuckahoe, New York. DM: the reason I printed the information regarding Hogan and Piper, and no others, is because my story was about lying in the media regarding steroids, something hardly limited to pro wrestlers, as Ben Johnson, Lyle Alzado, Brian Bosworth and many others have all proven, not to attempt to list names of possible users. When a large percentage of those in the profession have used or are using steroids, and it's incredibly easy to understand why, it is the profession that needs to be looked at rather than point fingers at the wrestlers, as long as there is a link between unnatural physiques and economic benefits. In the case of Hogan and Piper, you have guys who have gone public in the media and lied, rather than honestly face the issue. I want to make clear, in Hogan's case, this has nothing to do with all the hearsay, speculation, physical evidence and even alleged first-hand reports regarding this subject, but his public statements regarding his subpoena in the Zarian case and his statements regarding steroid use in the WWF and the WWF steroid policy in comparison with other sports. The evidence of specific packages clearly contradicts his statements earlier that week when he claimed his name was involved in the Zarian trial simply because there was a photo of him with Zarian in Zarian's office when Zarian was busted. Piper claimed to have been off steroids for 3 years in the Oregonian and also said he used steroids because he needed them to fight bigger guys, when in the trial he admitted receiving a package on March 24, 1990, while in Hollywood doing acting work, at a time when plans were for him to only wrestle one more match before taking time off to work on a proposed television show. If one goes public with a statement, by doing so, they are asking for that statement to be scrutinized. In the Zarian case, every package specifically asked about to Brian Blair, Dan Spivey, Rick Martel, and Piper, which was not every package on the list at all. Only a few packages were asked about specifically because to ask about anything farther would have been wasting time in the trial once each man specifically admitted to purchasing steroids from Zarian. When the charge against the doctor in regard to the individuals had already been admitted to, all 4 wrestlers admitted contained steroids. In some cases, steroids and downers, but in most cases, just steroids. As for the dosage of steroids, that varies by the wrestlers, but the doctor I spoke with is a successful competitive bodybuilder and bodybuilding trainer. He said 1 pound of steroids, figuring decadurabolin as the one most prevalently used since it's the combination most effective / least toxic / most inexpensive, equals 448 shots. As a competitive bodybuilder, he'd take 2 shots per week when not preparing for a contest but being on a growth cycle and 3 per week in the last 8 weeks while dieting. 1 pound of DECA taken in that matter would be practically enough for a career. When you get to the hardcore druggies, and there are wrestlers who fit into that classification, or national and pro-level bodybuilders, obviously they are taking a whole lot more, stacking the steroids. Taking several steroids at once, staying on steroids year-round, etc. 1 pound would hardly last as long. The point is the quantity in some of the FedEx receipts that are more than 1 pound, if they are steroids, and the odds are that they were, since every package brought up in the trial turned out to be. You're talking about a serious quantity. Dick the Bruiser. Sorry to hear about Dick the Bruiser, as he was one of the main reasons I got hooked on pro wrestling almost 30 years ago. In the early 60s, he used to wrestle at the Cow Palace with people like Killer Kowalski, Pat Patterson, and Ray Stevens. I never got to see him wrestle live, but it never lacked for entertainment when he appeared on television. One of his best performances was on the old Lou Gordon talk show. The show was based in the Midwest, but was syndicated into the Bay Area. The show was a watered-down version of Morton Downey Jr. or Wally George, but without a studio audience. Fred Cooper, Richmond, California. Sometimes the only way we can mark the passing of time is to witness the passing of our childhood heroes. I thought about Dick the Bruiser all day long. I'll remember him as someone who would never lose. He was invincible and menacing. Rick Carlson, San Rafael, California. Suburban Commando. I have to find fault with your analysis of No Holds Barred. I think the success of NHB was because the WWF thoroughly understood Hulk Hogan and his appeal. They made a movie for a specific target audience, WWF fans. The result was an ass-kicking Hogan in a kick-ass movie. It was advertised as such and it sold. New Line tried to broaden his appeal by putting him in an action comedy and tried to push him as a kinder, gentler Hulk. They just demonstrated their misunderstanding of Hogan. Nobody wanted to see him in an action comedy. I think Hogan has a film career ahead of him. He has a certain sweetness and charm I found very disarming. But he must pick his projects more carefully. Curtis Minato. Los Angeles, California. Party politics. Thought you might get a laugh out of this? The WWF and the Cook County Republican Party put on a fundraiser on October 12. Tickets were $35 a person and it was supposed to include the following: one-star autographs and photos with Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter. One-star main floor tickets to the 2 p.m. WWF card at the Rosemont Horizon. One-star free parking. One-star a couple of hot dogs and cokes with the wrestlers. One-star time scheduled was noon to 1:30 p.m. I verbally confirmed it October 7th. After racing to get to the event, here's what happened. One-star police officers guiding traffic had no idea what I was talking about. I had to park in the private lot and pay $6. One-star the autograph/photo session didn't start until 12:50 p.m. One-star the wrestlers on hand were Wow Virgil and Jim Neidhart. One-star no photos were allowed to be taken with the wrestlers. One-star fans were sent in one door, got autographs, and were immediately rushed out another door. One-star we were given coupons for a free hot dog and coke for when we got to the matches across the street. One-star our seats were not on the main floor, but higher up. I'm seriously thinking of switching to the Democratic Party this year. Richard Jenick. Chicago Heights, Illinois. For Chicago/Los Angeles readers, on November 15th, a new Oriental shopping center will open in suburban Chicago, and the bookstore and video store with the most current service here in the Chicago area will be moving there. The shopping center is located at 100 East Algonquin Road in Arlington Heights, about 25 miles northwest of downtown Chicago. The location is on the corner of Algonquin Road and Arlington Heights Road. It's called the Yauhan Plaza, and those of you in the Los Angeles area may be familiar with that name. There is a 3-story Yauhan Plaza at the intersection of 3rd, Alameda and Central Streets in downtown Los Angeles at the southwest corner of the Little Tokyo area. The JBC Japan Book Center video store will move into Yauhan Plaza on November 15th. They generally get tapes each Friday morning before noon of the previous weekend's wrestling shows. JBC normally charges $2.50 for 2-night rental and $5 for 1 week, plus a $20 annual membership fee. I highly recommend them and they are unbelievably friendly, although only a few of the employees speak good English. The Asahiya bookstore here in Chicago will move into the Yauhan Plaza as well. They normally get Japanese magazines Weekly Gong and Weekly Pro Wrestling each Friday afternoon around 2 p.m. The magazines usually hit the stands in Japan only the day before. There is a branch of the same Asahiya chain at the Yauhan Plaza in Los Angeles, and they usually get the magazines at around 6 p.m. every Friday. Many employees speak English well, and they can special order the year-end guides and catalogs. Generally the magazines cost from $8.50 to $9 per issue per week, depending on the yen, but if you buy a subscription, they'll order an extra copy each week and hold it for you until you come in, and the price tends to be lower, about $7 per issue. I don't think it's necessary to read Japanese to enjoy the Japanese magazines, but it does help. Steve Sims. Chicago, Illinois. Wrestling history. I have for some years enjoyed reading about the history of the wrestling business. One of the only books I have been able to locate that gives an inside view of the business is The Fall Guys by Marcus Griffin, written in 1936. It gives a wonderful portrait of the era from George Hockenschmidt and Frank Gotch through the chaos after Dick Chicote's theft of the world title from Dano O'Mahony in 1936. I have also found the book Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George by Joe Yaris to also be informative. In addition, I have spent many hours reviewing microfilm copies of newspapers from the same time frame. Unfortunately, after reading the Griffin book, I have been unable to find similar information for the years after 1936. Are there any books similar to The Fall Guys that would cover the years after 1936? John Williams. Pasadena, California. DM The Fall Guys is generally considered the only